Hi and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be talking about 10 things that I wish I knew at the beginning of my houseplant journey that would have saved me a little bit of time and a little bit of energy if I knew what I know now back then. So although I do believe it's all part of the learning journey, if you're beginning your journey with houseplants, hopefully today you can pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. Before we get into the video, hi, my name is Alexis and this is Wild Houseplants. I'm a houseplant enthusiast and I also work as a houseplant technician, which basically means when I'm not looking after my own plants, I'm looking after other people's. If you don't follow me already over on Instagram, you can find me there at Wild Houseplants. And if you enjoy this video today, I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button below. It doesn't cost you anything, but it would mean a lot to me. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Number one is light. Understanding just how important light is for your plants. It is honestly the single most important thing for them, and it's the difference between your houseplants looking sad or at best okay and then them thriving. It is honestly the most important thing. We're all guilty of going to the garden centre or going to the plant shop and thinking and falling in love with a plant and taking it home and putting it in a spot in our home where we want it to be because we think it looks nice there. But it might not be the best place for your plant to thrive. When we're talking about light, you'll hear one term banded around a lot, which is bright indirect light. And it can be really hard for us to kind of get our head around what that actually means in our home. Really, you want to be giving your houseplants an unobstructed view of the sky. So that's why we want to obviously, where possible, have our plants close to the window. If you notice anything like bleaching leaves or the leaves turning sort of yellow or looking a bit bleached out, then your plant is probably receiving too much light, and that will be a sign for you to move it slightly back from the window. It is important to know that not all of our houseplants require the same levels of light, and doing a little bit of research will go a long way. For example, if you can just look up your particular plant in question and look up where they grow in nature, where they grow and how they grow, then that will give you an understanding of what kind of situation you want to try and recreate in your home if possible. For example, if your plant naturally grows out in the desert, in the baking hot sun, then you know you're going to want to give that plant as much light as you possibly can. So you're going to want to have it right up against the window of a south-facing window. If, however, you have a plant that maybe grows along the forest floor, it's just getting really dappled sunlight through lots of other leaves, then maybe think about putting that one in a north-facing window, or maybe slightly back from an east or a west window. If you have a house that just has maybe north-facing windows, then that's going to be receiving the least amount of light throughout the day. So you may want to consider what houseplants you purchase according to what will do well in a north-facing window. If you have floor-to-ceiling panoramic views of the sky, then you really can be open to having whatever houseplants you want, because you're going to be like laughing, quite frankly, because you're going to have such amazing light available to you. If you're still feeling a little bit unsure and a bit bamboozled about the whole light thing, then I would suggest that you invest in a light meter. These cost somewhere between £30 to £50 depending on the one that you get. I think this was around £30. I'll link it down below. It's from Amazon, and it really takes the guesswork out for you, because we can think that we're in a bright spot, but actually it's not enough light for our plant. With these, they work really easily. You can take off the cap here. You're going to turn it on, and you've got an option to either use foot candles, FC, or Lux, Lux. I prefer to use foot candles. So I've got it on the foot candle setting. You then place this onto your leaf like this, and it will give you a reading in foot candles. So right now, this particular leaf here is receiving 144 foot candles, 145 foot candles. There's a brilliant article by the Houseplant Journal that I will also link down below, which gives you an estimate of what each of your plants should be receiving for maintaining themselves, and then also optimum growth as well. So have a look at that down below. It's a really fantastic blog post, and it's got so much information in there that will really help you out. Once you understand what light you have available to you in your home, you can try and assess whether you have enough light available or maybe you want to supplement with grow lights. I personally do supplement with grow lights, even though I do have a decent amount of natural light in my home. And this is because I like to have plants maybe in the darker spots of my home where there wouldn't be enough natural light. It also helps me boost my plants in those autumn and winter months when they're naturally getting a lot less light because there's a lot less hours of sun in the day. When I first started understanding about grow lights, I was a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest with you, but there are some really fantastic grow lights on the market and I can just talk you through some very briefly now. So if you have a plant maybe on a shelf that has sort of a shelving like this, and maybe you want some strip lights above, then I've got some fantastic ones that I use, which are from Amazon. I can link them down below. They are really cheap and easy, and they come with a timer built in. So you can just set your timer based on the system there. And as I say, they are not going to be like the strongest, but they're definitely going to be suitable for the majority of houseplants that you have in your home. My personal favourite grow light is the Pianta grow light from Grow Gang. You can screw this into an existing lamp you have in your home. I have one in an IKEA lamp just behind me here. But Grow Gang, also do offer a adjustable lamp as well. It's a floor lamp and it has an adjustable head that you can move up and down depending on what kind of plant you might want to have it on. You can either have it potentially on a table and with it being quite low, or you can have it on the floor over a much larger plant like this Monstera, for example. Number 2 is don't water on a schedule. This may be something you might have heard other plant people talk about quite a lot. And the reason is because all your plants are going to dry out at different levels and each plant needs a different amount of water. So if you were to water all of your plants every Saturday, you're going to have some plants that are going to be loving that and others that are that's just way too much for them. It also depends on the time of year it is. Is it winter or is it summer? Obviously our plants are likely to dry out much quicker in the summer months when there's much more hours of sunlight, and they're going to take longer to dry out in the winter when the weather is colder and they're receiving a lot less light. Although I don't suggest that you water on a schedule, I do suggest having 1 or maybe 2 days a week when you check in with your plants. This is what I do. I check in with my plants on a Sunday and also a Thursday. Those are my 2 days. And basically I will have a look around at all my plants and I will see, I sort of know my plants well enough now to know when they need to be watered based on basically how they look, or obviously I know them well enough to know this one I tend to water every 12 days, this one I tend to water every 4 days, and so on. The best thing that you can do is check the moisture of the soil before you water your plant. This will give you a clear indication that your plant is thirsty or not. I personally use a wooden skewer. These are just kebab skewers. You insert it into the plant and you'll move it around like this and you'll pull it out. And if it's got lots of soil still attached to it, then you know the soil is still damp and you don't need to water your plant. If it comes out and the skewer is dry, then you know that plant definitely needs to be watered. Obviously, different plants have different watering requirements. And as a general rule, something with a very soft, fine leaf like this fern here, this Boston fern, these leaves are really papery thin and they've got really narrow stems and also a very fine, delicate root system. So this plant isn't able to hold on to a lot of water in its leaves, its stems and its roots, which is why ferns are generally considered to be plants that need to be watered more frequently. This Hoya, however, for example, has these thick, waxy leaves and it's got a thicker stem. And so these waxy leaves are able to hold on to a lot of water. And so this plant needs to be watered less regularly. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got something like a desert cactus, which has an amazing ability to hold on to water, because obviously you think about it in its natural environment, it might be going months and months without rain. Number 3 is fertilize. Fertilize your plants. It really does make a difference. I often get asked, Alexis, why do my plants look so sad? And I'll say, have you given them a feed? Have they been fertilised? And they'll say, no. And I'll be like, well, that might be why. Especially if you've already got things like an amazing light in your home and you're watering correctly, then and your plants are still looking a little bit sad, then it may well be that they just need a good boost of food. I personally use liquid gold leaf. It's a fantastic complete fertiliser, and it can also be used for hydroponics as well, because I do grow quite a lot of my plants semi-hydroponically using Lechuza Pon or Soil Ninja's semi-hydro mix. There is some debate about how often you should fertilise your plants and when you should fertilise your plants. More of the old school advice was that you fertilise your plants during the growing season, so you start fertilising them in spring and do it all throughout the spring and summer months, and then you ease off on the fertilising throughout the autumn and winter months. Personally, I fertilise my plants all year round as long as they are actively putting out new growth. So if they are putting out new leaves, if they are sprouting, if they are flowering, if they look like they are growing, actively putting out new growth, like I say, then yes, I'm going to give them food, because as long as they're growing, they're going to need to have food. If they go dormant, like alocasias, for example, are one plant that does tend to go dormant over the winter months sometimes. So if a plant is going into dormancy, i.e. it's not putting out any new growth at all, its growth completely seems to have stunted, then I will ease off on the fertiliser and I won't fertilise that plant until it starts producing new growth again. Otherwise, I pretty much fertilise all my plants all year round and with every watering. So, I mean, if I'm in a rush one time and I don't fertilise it, I'm not going to, give myself a hard time, but most of the time, as long as I've got a little bit of time and energy, I will fertilise my plants with every watering. Number 4 is a little bit of research goes a long way. I have covered this a little bit in point 1 and 2 already, but doing 10 minutes on Google, understanding where your plant grows in its natural habitat will really give you a huge amount of insight into what position this should be in your home, how often it likes to be watered, and so on. And when I'm talking about doing a little bit of research, I'm talking about really understanding where this plant grows. I'm not talking about the label, that plastic label that comes with the plant, which is completely and utterly useless. They are completely generic and they are not really tailored specifically to each plant. So if, for example, I followed the advice, I'd be watering this monstera like twice a week, which is absolutely too much for that plant. So ignore those little stickers that come with your plant and basically do a little bit of research into how this plant grows in its natural habitat, and that will give you a huge amount of insight. Point number 5 is drainage is key. I covered this in the repotting video that I posted last week, which I'll link down below. But basically drainage is so key. And where possible, you want to plant your plant into either a plastic nursery pot, which has drainage, or into a terracotta or ceramic pot, which also has drainage. You don't want to be planting your plant directly into a ceramic pot without any drainage, because then when you water your plant, the water is sitting at the bottom, and that can potentially lead to things like root rot and fungal diseases and things like that. You can obviously put your plastic nursery pot into an outer planter and then tip out any excess water and then pot your plant back into that and put it back on the shelf so it still looks attractive. If you are somebody that struggles with overwatering, then I would suggest that you maybe plant your plants into terracotta, because terracotta is porous and it will draw out the moisture from the soil quicker, so your plants will dry out more quickly. So it will sort of probably save you losing a few plants along the way. Number 6 is pests are unavoidable. I used to get so stressed at the beginning of my houseplant journey when I first came into contact with pests on my houseplants. I didn't know what to do. I thought it was the end of the world. I didn't know what the early signs were, so the plants were already quite infested by the time I realised. And it used to stress me out so much, and I would spend hours washing every plant and wiping all the shelves and getting completely and utterly stressed about it and thinking that potentially I'd done something wrong. The fact that I'd had pests on my houseplants, but they are honestly unavoidable. The reality is that if you're going to grow your houseplant collection, you're going to come into contact with pests at some point. Pests come in through the windows when we open them in the spring and summer months. They come in on potentially new plants you bring into your collection. They can come in soil. They can come in on our clothes if we've been out perhaps in the park. They can come in on our pets. So honestly, I think once you get to your head around the idea that you're going to come into contact with them at some point, and you get yourself some good knowledge of knowing what the early signs are, so what thrip damage looks like, what spider mite damage looks like, then you can start to recognize those signs early on, and the infestation will never get to a point where it's, you can't fix it. So I will do a separate video on this, because pests is such a big subject when it comes to our house plants. But the main thing I would say is the five bad guys that you're going to come into contact with potentially are fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are the annoying little black flies that live in your soil. They like a very moist organic matter. So if you are potentially someone who likes to overwater your plants, you may well find that you're having a worse problem with fungus gnats than someone who lets their plants dry out quite a lot in between waterings. There are some things that you can do to help you with your fungus gnats, and I will get into that in a separate video. The second thing, so the second pest is thrips. They are the ones that I struggle with the most. They are the bane of my existence, especially because they love Monstera, and I have a lot of Monstera in my collection. Thrip damage tends to present itself as almost like a sort of browny or greyish mark normally on the underside of the leaves, and the larvae are sort of like little white grains of rice, and the adults are black and more sort of pointy looking. I can insert some images on the screen. Yeah, they are the worst for me because they seem to be the one that I tend to come into contact with the most, and they can take your plant down really, really quickly. And you can't get rid of the damage. You just have to cut those leaves off, treat the plant, and then hopefully the new growth that will come in will be not damaged anymore. Thrips love new growth. So if you notice your new growth is coming in black or deformed in some way, maybe there's some rippling on the leaves, then it's highly likely that you've got thrips. The third evil guy to look out for is spider mites. Spider mites are minute. You can get both white and red spider mites. And again, they tend to hide on the underside of the leaves because they want to go unnoticed. And if your situation with spider mites gets particularly bad and you get a really bad infestation, you will actually notice webbing, sometimes between the leaves or between the leaf and the stem. And once you get webbing, you've got a pretty bad infestation. So yeah, not good, guys. But again, I will get into more details on them in another video. The fourth pest you may come into contact with is mealybugs. Mealybugs are like little white fluffy clouds, but that makes them sound too nice. Little white fluffy wood lice, I think probably sounds more appropriate. And they are really difficult to get rid of because they get into all the nooks and crannies of your plants. They are really good at hiding, and so they can be very difficult to treat, especially if your plant has lots of nooks and crannies. They're particularly fond of things like Hoya, but they can really get into any plant. I personally haven't had any problems with them in my collection, but I do treat them quite a lot on clients' plants, and they are really hard to get rid of forever. You're sort of constantly having to look out for them and treat, because like I say, they are very sneaky, those ones. And the last bad guy to look out for is scale. Scale presents as sort of like a brown lump, and you can also find it on the leaves, but also I tend to find them more on the stems. They can also put out these little searchers, little white searchers, which they sort of put out. Again, I'll put a little picture on the screen, and they can be really hard to remove because they've got a very hard armor, and you sort of have to pick them off. It's all quite gross, I'm not going to lie, but I will get into it in another video. At some point, you probably will come into contact with one of these guys, but like I say, it is kind of unavoidable. The more you get used to dealing with them, the more you get used to understanding what those early signs look like, the quicker you can get on top of things. 7 is embrace repotting. I actually really enjoy repotting, and I thought quite a lot of other houseplants enthusiasts did too, but I've seen a few people recently on Instagram just talking about how annoying it is. But personally, I actually find it quite relaxing. And so if you can embrace repotting, not be scared of repotting, the benefits to your plants are huge. Refreshing the soil, which is refreshing the nutrients, you can also gives you a really good chance to have a look at the root system. And if you do have any problems, maybe root rot or your roots are particularly dry, you can sort of change your watering schedules and remove any roots that are damaged. It's just a really fantastic thing for your plant. Again, I did talk about this more in the repotting video I did last week, which I'll link below. But yeah, if you can embrace repotting, it does get a lot less scary. And I think it can become quite enjoyable. So yeah, embrace repotting. You really want to make sure that you're avoiding having pest outbreaks in your home. I do highly recommend showering your plants regularly, just with water. If you have a garden, you can take them outside and hose them down with the hose, or you can stick them in the bathtub or the shower and give the front and back of the leaves a really good wash. I would suggest that you do this when your plant is due for a water anyway, because you don't want to be oversaturating the soil. If your plant is particularly big and you can't get it outside or into a shower, then you can clean the leaves with a microfiber cloth and some water, or there are some products on the market as well. I tend to use the Plant Invigorator for just cleaning my leaves as more of a preventative. I don't really use it so much as a treatment. But again, keeping your leaves clean and wiping them regularly, you will remove any sort of 1 to 2 that might be hanging around, and that will prevent an outbreak. That will prevent an outbreak in your home. The 9th thing that I wish I knew sooner was that you are going to lose a few plants along the way, and sometimes it's your fault and sometimes it's not. So when I first killed my first houseplant, I was pretty devastated. I thought that I'd done something terrible. It was all my fault, blah, 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 blah. And I know a lot of people feel really, you know, upset about this when they lose a plant, especially if it's a plant that's rare or more expensive and all those sorts of things. That's why I always tell people to really get used to the more easy care houseplants before they expand their collection into those more rare, the more finicky, the more expensive plants, because losing an expensive plant is heartbreaking to you and your wallet. So yeah, you will lose a few plants along the way, and it's okay. It's all part of the learning journey. So you may have lost a plant and it may have been your fault. Maybe you didn't give it enough light. Maybe you watered it too frequently. These are 2 things that are more than likely to kill your plant, and so that's possible. But there are some things that might have happened that are not your fault. For example, your plant may have arrived into your home with pests, and maybe you didn't know about it, so you didn't treat it. That's why I always say when you pick up a new plant from the garden centre, just to check the front and the undersides of the leaves to see if you can see anything with the naked eye. It doesn't mean if you can't see anything that there's nothing there, but that you're avoiding an obvious infestation. The second thing to think about is that your plant may have come to you with issues with its root system. That's why I always recommend repotting your plants into your own DIY mix after a period of acclimation into your home. So I normally let my plants acclimate for around about 2 weeks to a month. If that plant is particularly difficult and fussy, I might leave it a little bit longer. But then I will replant that plant either into my DIY soil mix, which is houseplant soil, perlite and orchid bark, or if I'm moving it into semi-hydro, then I will use either Lechuza Pon or Soil Ninja's semi-hydro mix. At the end of the day, when we lose plants, we learn a lot, and it's all part of the learning journey when it comes to houseplants or any new hobby that you take up. You are going to have highs and lows along the way. And the 10th thing that I wish I knew at the beginning of my houseplant journey is how addictive houseplants are. Like a lot of people, I started getting into houseplants at the beginning of lockdown, and when we were spending a lot of time at home, and I wanted our home to feel as sort of green and lovely as possible. And yeah, I started collecting more and more and more, and now I live in an indoor jungle, which I absolutely love. but it can be a little bit of an expensive hobby, not just the plants themselves, but all the pots that they have to go in, and then all the soil or the semi-hydro or the fertilizer, the grow lights, all the things that you end up buying to make your houseplants thrive and happy. It can get quite expensive. The other thing to think about is it's an awful lot of plants to leave when you go on holiday. So you may need to find somebody that you trust to look after your houseplants, somebody that can come in and water them, but not hopefully overwater them. And it does mean that now when I go on holiday, I'm not just thinking about what to pack for myself, my husband, my kids, where's my dog going to go, but I'm also thinking, right, I need to think about how I'm going to manage the 160 houseplants that I am leaving behind, especially if we're going away in the height of summer and they're likely to dry out quite quickly. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't change it for anything. I absolutely love having this amount of houseplants in my home, but it is just something worth thinking about before you invest in having too many houseplants too quickly. Okay, so that's the end of the video. That is the 10 things I wish I knew at the beginning of my houseplant journey. I hope you found this video useful, and if you have, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button below and give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.